everybody, welcome back. It's Whiteboard Wednesday, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking on adrenal fatigue. That's right, adrenal fatigue. So if we haven't figured it out by now, adrenal fatigue is not a real medical condition, all right? It's really a pattern of HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal dysfunction. So your adrenals don't actually burn out as we used to think and stop making cortisol, although that can happen in what is known as Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune condition, but it's really, really rare, and it does not apply to really most of the population or you watching this. So rather, there is an adjusted stress response over time after exposure to chronic stress. So as you know, when you have a stress response, you start sweating, your digestion stops, you're more alert. What else? You have blood flow to your muscles, your heart rate goes up, you're breathing faster, more oxygen is coming in and out. So that is all mediated by cortisol and adrenaline and other hormones. And cortisol is really important because it stimulates, blood sugar, right, to get circulated in your bloodstream from gluconeogenesis. It mobilizes fatty acids into the blood. It suppresses inflammation, right? It increases coagulation and blood clotting. You start to retain more sodium and so forth, okay? Friedrich Nietzsche is the one who said, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger," and that's essentially what hormesis is. It's an adaptation to where we have low-grade stressors that stimulate the pathways of the cell to amplify its capacity to withstand and endure stress. So stress is a good thing. A little bit of it is a good thing, right? And that is what kind of ties into allostasis, right? And allostasis is where that stress response to a challenge creates equilibrium and balance in the body, which we want, right? However, when you have an allostatic load, that's a problem because it's an accumulation of repeated stressors over time, like trauma and infections and pollutants and your thoughts and emotions, and that can tarnish the body and really disrupt the HPA function. So we should look at how the stress spectrum looks. We have the arousal alarm stage, the adaptation stage, and the exhaustion stage. When you have an immediate bout of stress, cortisol and DHEA are elevated. However, it drops back down to baseline. You're asymptomatic, no real issues. It pretty much happens to all of us on a daily basis. However, if stress goes on like that on a daily basis for months and even years, potentially it can go into the adaptation stage. And that's when you have elevations, drop-offs actually in cortisol in the AM, right? So you can have, this is like the diurnal graph, right? You can have, AM, PM. You can have cortisol be low, right? When it should be high, and then kind of go like this, and higher in the evening, which is not ideal. You can have cortisol be low, kind of go higher around noon, and quickly drop off like that. Still not ideal either, right? And you can also have cortisol be completely normal, where it could be high in the morning and drop off in the evening, and it can just be like kind of chronically high as well. But either way, it's the ratio between cortisol and DHEA that's a problem, and that's how you can have anxiety, depression, blood pressure issues, and even glucose dysregulation. So what's going on? Why is this happening, right? Well, we know that physiologically speaking, you can cause this high elevation in cortisol through excessive exercise and activity like that, but mostly, in my opinion, the literature really shows this, it's mental stress. It's our interpretation of things as perceived stress, and our emotions are really getting the best of us. So when you have chronic cortisol, what can happen is you can have downregulation of cortisol receptors and insensitivity. And this is really a protective mechanism so that the cortisol doesn't harm the body, but really it's doing that in the end anyway, kind of like what insulin does when you have insulin resistance, right? Through different mechanisms though. So there's also this issue where high cortisol can also damage the brain. And it does this through atrophy of the hippocampus, the amygdala, and even the orbital frontal regions of the brain. There are immune system changes. So the macrophages and the Th2 cells are resistant to cortisol long term. And really, the ability of the immune system to respond to anti-inflammatory signals gets compromised. So you can't shut down like interleukin 6 and these really nasty cytokines that are promoting inflammation. So we know that abuse and adverse childhood events increases HPA activity later in life. And high cortisol turns into this cortisol resistance. Some of the symptoms that you probably have experienced when you have high cortisol and this going on, and you probably are experiencing now maybe, is irritability, fatigue, night sweats, insomnia, poor sleep as a whole, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar issues, memory impairment, panic disorder, IBS issues, and anxiety and hypertension, high blood pressure, and weight gain, right? The gut has like 400 times more receptors for cortisol than anywhere else in the body. And when that's paired with insulin, that's how you accumulate body fat in your belly area. So high cortisol can induce this and cause actually release of fatty acids into the bloodstream, which is implying a deeper cardiovascular type of issue. Okay, so this can also cause postural hypotension, right? So blood pressure is dropping, and when you try to stand up after a period of time, you get dizziness. So high cortisol also, and paired with low DHEA, is significantly associated with depression. And we have actually found out that a flatlined diurnal cortisol pattern is correlated with poor mental health as a whole, just as even high cortisol can be doing that as well. All right, so long-term cortisol overall, though, has the ability to put you at risk for cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disease, and even promote metastasis in cancer if you have that. So it's pretty nasty stuff, right, as you can see that. Now, we know that perceived stress can obviously cause this phenomenon. Inflammation can do the same thing, right? Because when you have things like infections and gut dysbiosis and fungus and poor detoxification and heavy metals and those sort of things, that causes an inflammatory response, and therefore cortisol is going to follow to suppress the immune system, right? So that's how that can happen. Now, we know that PCBs and dioxins can actually accumulate in the adrenal glands and interfere with androgen, testosterone production, and cortisol production. So you should be aware of that. Now, magnesium deficiencies cause actually issues with some of the signaling coming down from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And that's also going to relate to your adrenals and secreting cortisol. So you're going to want to need probably B5 if you're really feeling this going on, right? Probably even zinc and vitamin C, because they're all really important for catecholamine production and really adrenaline, norepinephrine, those sort of things. All right, so let's move into the exhaustion stage. And this is where a lot of people end up. So overall, there is a decline in cortisol pretty much throughout the entire day, but it's also paired with a decrease in DHEA, okay? And this is why it's important. So people who have this going on, they basically are not converting progesterone into DHEA, okay? And therefore, when you have that going on, you end up also dampening all of this, right? You're not making enough aldosterone, which is retaining sodium in water. You're also not making a lot of cortisol, obviously. So when you're not making aldosterone, you have these symptoms that you're pretty much familiar with. You have a decrease in blood pressure because you're not retaining sodium in water. You have an increase in sodium loss, again, because of aldosterone being non-existent almost, and an increase in thirst, cravings, and sweating, okay? And like I said before, you're not making DHEA, and that's the precursor for estrone, E1, or the different estrogens, estrone, estradiol, and estriol, and testosterone, obviously. And you can also have irritability and dizziness and fatigue and slow wound healing and hot flashes, right? And low libido because you're not making any testosterone, right? Your sex drive is in the toilet. So this is a pretty typical pattern that happens for a lot of people. And if you have PCOS or you're on the spectrum, this is a complete disaster if you get to this point and you have stress going on in your life. It will completely aggravate it, especially for the women who have the lean PCOS type. Figure competitors, people who diet all the time. This is really what the late stages are for people who chronically diet all the time. So we have the perceived stresses from modern daily living that we've already talked about, but behind that, I think that's even more important and gets entirely missed and deserves more attention is trauma and adverse childhood events, right? So when you are a child, you have this biological programming or embedding from that prolonged exposure of trauma. And that causes this heightened sensitivity of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So the stress is present throughout your entire lifespan, really, unless you do something to change it. And that can result in neuroendocrine dysregulation of the adult stress response later in life. So all the perceived stress of modern life that you're going through is really having a doubling effect because you've already programmed your stress response and hardwired it early in life. Abuse during childhood has been associated with abnormal patterns of cortisol production in response to stress in adulthood. When stress occurs during sensitive periods of development, like up until around the age of 7 or 8, it adjusts how the physiology operates going forward. The nervous and immune systems start to develop a coping process to keep balance and harmony within. So early life sensitivity and trauma, maltreatment disturbs the neurobiological development and hardwires the brain, like I said, to stress. So your sympathetic nervous system is jacked up and responds early to stress. And cortisol is then elevated and carried forward into your adulthood. And this causes wear and tear on your body and really puts you at risk for a whole host of diseases. Let's talk quickly about testing. So I kind of alluded to this before, but saliva is the most reliable. And you're basically getting what they call a 4-point salivary adrenal index, and you're taking a sample of your saliva at 4 points throughout the day. So 30 minutes upon awakening in the AM, around noon, the afternoon, and in the evening. Now, we can do plasma, however, it's not free cortisol. It's bound to a corticosteroid binding globulin, that's carrier protein, that is not really going to show you a lot of what's happening down at the cellular level. Right, we can actually even do urine now too with some new labs. But saliva is probably what I recommend and what most practitioners and doctors will use. As far as DHEA goes, we want to look at DHEA in the saliva because it changes daily. And DHEAS, which is the sulfate form, is best in the blood because it's actually like 100 times higher than DHEA. But overall, we want to look at the cortisol-DHEA ratio. It's really going to tell us a lot. All right, so you have high cortisol, you have low flatline cortisol all day, you have low DHEA. What do you do? Well, there are quite a couple different interventions. I'm going to give you some general ideas. However, you have to keep in mind that you really need a personalized approach with this. Keep that in mind. So lifestyle intervention is probably the first obvious thing we need to look at. Improve your sleep, cut back on your exercise, do more walking, significantly cut back on your exercise, get rid of the cardio. Right? Start to get into a sauna, right? Get a massage, go on vacation, climb a tree, talk to animals, dance through a prairie. I don't care. Do something fun and different than what you're already doing every day except working, right? Avoiding stimulants, caffeine, Starbucks, energy drinks, alcohol, all really good ideas. It's not a good idea to keep continuing that stuff as of now. Your carb quality matters. Having a low glycemic load, food combination, pairing your carbs with protein and fats to stabilize blood sugar levels. If you have poor, refined carbs in your diet and you're spreading out your meals like once every 6-7 hours, that puts you at risk for hypoglycemia. You can have that, and that would cause a lot of these symptoms we're talking about here, right? So cortisol will have to come to the rescue to raise blood sugar levels, so you don't want that. Now, outside of that, I would say a B complex is going to be really helpful for you if you're experiencing a lot of HPA axis dysfunction. And vitamin C, magnesium, right? Phosphatidylcholine is good. I like doing that if people have issues with sleep at night. You can take that obviously before bed. Adaptogens, right? So things that help with the HPA axis kind of controls. Eleuthero, Siberian ginseng is a good one. St. John's wort is another favorite I like that helps activate HPA axis activity, or Korean ginseng. Licorice. You gotta be careful with that one because it can help with energy, however, it can also increase blood pressure. So check with your doctor on that if you use that. Schizandra is a good one I like to use. It protects against stress and cortisol, reduces stress, and does the same HPA stimulation. And rhodiola, right? If you're tired and exhausted all the time, that can help a lot and help with cognitive function and mental performance as well. And then ashwagandha, as you probably have heard of before, if you're really exhausted but your brain's moving all the time, that can be really helpful. All right, that's it. That's my rant on adrenal fatigue. So hopefully that made a lot of sense and you have better clarity on what this really is about and the devastating consequences that can ensue. All right, so if you have any questions, don't come to me about it. I'm kidding. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. And if I can do anything for you, let me know. Catch you next time.